Welcome to episode 4 of the Using AI podcast. I'm joined here by ML research scientist Alex Papadopoulos, which I'm getting better at saying, I think, and AI startup founder Rafie Faruq. So last week we spoke about AI's impact on the future of work, and we got thinking about all the AI startups and this AI gold rush that we were all going to experience. So this week is about AI startups. I sort of wanted to find lots of examples of AI startups for this theme, and I can, but everything is going to be overshadowed by Google I/O this week. I wonder if either of you want to give your opinion on that, just to kick us off.
Yeah, hi everyone. So Google I/O obviously happened this week. In terms of my research on it and reading over it, I can't say I found it that unique and surprising. I was just talking to Alex P earlier, but the main mentions include, first of all, starting off with the AI they already have in their products, notably helping people write emails through autocomplete and even spell check. So maybe nothing that exciting there. And they mentioned that those sorts of AIs have been used over 180 billion times, which is a big number. But the major announcement was releasing their new language model, Palm 2, which has improved multilingual reasoning and coding capabilities. For example, further fine-tuning apparently has reduced inaccurate reasoning by 9 times, however they measure that. And yeah, apart from that, they have talked a lot about AI responsibility, but we can go into more details in a moment. Maybe I'll hand over to Alex P to get his views.
Yeah, so first of all, my first impression is I'm very curious to try this out against GPT-4 and see how it does this time, comparing like reasoning or multilingual capabilities. The second thing I want to say is you mentioned just now, I guess, that it's nothing exciting, but at the same time they're putting a bunch of AI into the product. So I guess that we all saw a few months ago how powerful the response was to putting AI in a chatbot interface, right, with ChatGPT. And as you were saying as well yourself, Rafie, a lot of the ChatGPT response was because of the UI itself, right, and not necessarily because of the novelty of the model. Although I do think the model was quite novel as well. But I'm curious to see like what happens now that Google and pretty much everyone is just putting AI everywhere, right? So we have Gmail, there's AI features. We have Google Sheets, there's custom trained spreadsheet models that will help you build stuff on there. I think in Google I/O also they announced that they will put generative AI in the next few months in Google search. So when you search something, there will be like a panel that expands on top that provides like a generative AI answer of like collating all the results together in the ChatGPT style. So I wonder, like, I assume that a lot of those will be failed experiments, kind of, and people won't use them too much. But even if a couple of those end up being genuinely useful, it will be, I guess, a massive development. The search, unfortunately, is for now US only. I tried to apply to join the beta testing, but it's English and US only. So I wonder when that will come to other countries. They're also putting, so it keeps going in a monologue here, but they're also putting a bunch of AI features in Android, right? So I don't know, small things, but maybe kind of cool things like generative AI backgrounds for your phone. So you can, like, they have kind of pre-templated prompts that you can fill in the gaps for, and then generate backgrounds, and then just swipe and pick through those and choose one for your advice, which is like, it's not groundbreaking from an AI perspective, right? But it's kind of cool, I guess.
Yeah, I enjoyed reading the title for the AI in Google Meet. It says, fostering more meaningful connections in Google Meet. And I was really looking forward to something big there, but it's just AI generated backgrounds. But I do agree with you, Alex P. A lot of this is a UX problem. So in Google Slides, it seems like you can just generate images, which, like I say, wasn't that great. What I'd love is the entire slide layout and content, basically everything to be generated, all of my work, which I guess we'll get there. And there are some great startups tackling that, which we can mention later. In Google Sheets, it seems a bit better. It looks like it will generate whole tables with kind of rich content. And in Gmail, it looks like it will generate a whole email and text, which is obviously, could be quite useful. And they're calling all of this Duet AI in their workspace, which is interesting.
I have to admit, I was impressed. I think it's a step change, because ChatGPT was heralded at hitting 100 million users faster than any application in history. And Bard, which is now going to be using Palm 2, is going to be integrated into search in 180 countries and every Android phone. So this change, I think, more than anything that OpenAI has done so far, although not taking away from the fact that they started this, really changes the landscape. I think we're going from, this is a crossing the chasm moment, I would suggest, where the applications have been pushed to a tool that is used by the mass majority of the Western world. Bing and ChatGPT have done wonders, but I think what Google have released is actually something that, hey, if I was investing in these companies, I'd probably short Microsoft and invest in Google following their announcements. And yes, fine, Palm versus GPT-4 might be quite a hard comparison, but I believe there is a technical report I haven't yet made myself read, which shows Palm 2 outperforming GPT-4 and ChatGPT in various areas. And so if that's true, and they push into coding hard, and we know that they have pushed into image generation hard with Adobe Firefly, which, by the way, I think is also a stunning move, because Firefly is one of the only tools that's actually providing royalties to the artists who have helped contribute to the learning of that model. So the fact that that is reaching the masses at the scale of Google tools, I think is a big win for the industry and some of the disputes that we're seeing, right? It sets a new norm at a scale that is hard for other companies to compete with. And then really nonsense stuff, right? So I think that's like the big picture stuff, which I think is amazing. The really nonsense stuff was the gimmicky wallpaper generation, creating it with emojis. Pixel phones had this magic eraser button where you could like tap on someone in the background and they would disappear, and AI would like fill in what would have been behind them, etc. They showed this example of a kid holding balloons, and the balloons had been blown out of the frame, and they drag the kid into the frame and it creates the balloons. And I mean, that's cool, but I just think it's odd if you start like editing and changing photos, like family photos and things. Like, what's wrong with a natural shot? I think it just sets the wrong experience of capturing a moment in reality. I like photography, and I don't really like the use of AI to create things. That being said, we have some disturbing pictures today, as usual. maybe we can get
I
back
was
to
gonna
those
say, Alex,
later.
it looks like he's looking over you all the time while speaking.
It's horrible.
It is
It's
kind of
absolutely
creepy.
horrible. Yeah. Yeah, it's for people listening, this is a man who looks like he's wearing some sort of shawl, full face covering, and then it goes down, and he doesn't really have broad shoulders. It sort of goes down in quite a narrow triangle where shoulders would be. And what you can't see is that he's actually a shell with a human head. And it's from a Reddit thread, which I'll pop in the show notes, which is the most disturbing images you've created with Stable Diffusion. So AI, generated images, obviously a boom thing. My favorite thing from IO, because you guys have covered a lot. The scope is massive. We're all going to be seeing it everywhere. Oh, writing emails is a good one. They basically challenged do not pay's entire business model, I would say. There are some real startup destroying announcements. And if you're an AI startup watching Google I/O, I mean, everyone knows that Google is a startup devourer. So the idea that you get an email into your Gmail and it is an airline who's offered you a voucher and you want a refund instead, or they haven't offered you a voucher and you want to say that you're eligible for a voucher or whatever, you can just type that prompt and it will just write that email for you. And there are entire businesses that have got big on providing that sort of easy to complain, easy to attack something that a company has said you're not eligible for. Models, like there are lots of models that have helped people with these things that are quite complicated, technical, feels like there's a barrier. And Google is just absolutely smashing it out the park. So I think this puts Google in first for me. And I don't know, I kind of want to hear quickly where you guys sit on that, but I think this puts Google in front in the AI race for the first time.
I mean, for me, it depends a lot on quality as well, right? So I'm curious to read that report that you mentioned, Alex. I didn't find it myself, but yeah, it depends on how Palm 2 compares to GPT-4, I guess. One thing that is kind of cool, I guess, is that they in Google I/O they also announced support for I don't remember whether they call them plugins, but they're essentially plugins. So just like the OpenAI ChatGPT plugins, Google Bard will also have access to third-party plugins that can help you do stuff like book flights or book a restaurant or whatever, which is pretty big. But I'm not sure I want to say favorite, but one piece of information that I really liked is that the new Palm model comes in several sizes, and the smallest size is small enough to run on mobile devices, like on device, which is super exciting for me. It also means that it will be a lot easier to fine tune on whatever data someone wants. But yeah, it's also exciting that a good model runs on a device. Depends on performance again, but I found that pretty cool.
It's always funny how when producing products, it's these combination of many small iterations that makes a good product. I'm just thinking of fine tuning and how, since we have these massive generalist models, how much will people be fine tuning in future? But there still is a need for very specialist areas like the law, and just improving accuracy on different benchmarks takes time, but there's many iterations that creates that effect of a great model. And that might be why Bard in the past didn't get such a good rep compared to GPT.
One other thing they announced, I think, also is like a medical specific model called MedPalm 2. There was already a MedPalm 1, but they are also releasing a MedPalm 2. So I'm pretty excited by that, having a background in healthcare AI, I guess. But I wonder when they'll do the same for legal. That could be interesting.
Alex P, I'm going to hold you specifically responsible in the history of humanity for transforming professional services, transforming or displacing.
Oh no.
So I think let's move on to startups then. There's one startup that caught my eye recently, and actually, unless any other pieces of news, I feel like there was enough news in that sort of covers the news section. All right, excellent. Is PDF AI? You guys heard about this? So it's nice. It as happened with the iPhone, right? You combine a few technologies together and you get a real innovative product. PDFs are really crap to read. The experience, the copy and paste, it's just awful, right? I think we all know that. In fact, we've heard from many of the lawyers who we've spoken to that sending a PDF of a contract is basically seen as rude or aggressive, legal, what's the word, etiquette. So PDF AI is to be used with things like legal agreements to, sort of financial reports, and you can just open it in this tool and you can have a chat with the document. Like we've been discussing about how books will be different, right? You'll be able to have a conversation with a book and get the information out that way rather than reading it line by line the entire way through. PDF AI is a way that you can just open a PDF and you can have a conversation with the contents of that document without needing to faff with all of the horrible copy pasting formatting nonsense that comes with PDF. By the way, Adobe sorted out. It's their format, isn't it? I think originally. So that's one I'll highlight. I'm happy to just do a bit of an introduction into the theme as well before you guys, if you want to mention any, feel free to interrupt me. But there are obviously big names in AI startups, and even the big companies are sort of acting a bit like AI startups at the moment. The appetite for funding, I think, has been quite interesting. As far as I can tell, it looks like 2021 was a highlight for VC investment into AI. I think that was something like 120 billion. Then 2022 was less than that, like quite a chunk less than that, something like 30 billion. So it really went down a lot. And then this year we're up to something like 15 billion or more. But effectively, we're on the up again. I'm surprised by those numbers. I think what probably happened is there were some massive investments that just skewed. Investments can quite often be power law dependent as well. So like the larger companies can end up just skewing an overall sort of like aggregate figure for the amount of investment in a VC company by VCs in AI companies in a certain year. But either way, it dipped in the pandemic as the gist. And last year, and now we're on the up again, which I think makes sense. It would be very odd if it wasn't going that way. Now, some examples are ex-GitHub CEO Nat Friedman and Andreessen Horowitz have invested in 11 labs. That's voice intelligence. I think voice AI is something that Alex Papa's worked on, but also is quite a complex and interesting space. That's 18 million. Generative AI for automating meeting notes. Rafie actually uses a tool for this. I've seen probably about 30 show up just in this topic alone. And they've raised $10 million in a seed round, which is bananas. Creative Fabrica, they launch AI design tools based on GPT-3 and Stable Diffusion. That's media and design industry, 61 million. Check Step, 5 million in seed funding to moderate online platforms. That's something I don't know if you guys have ever done. It's quite a painful process. I used to do that, where tradesmen would answer questions that have been posted by the public, and we'd have to moderate those manually. And you could build systems, but it was never really high on the priority list to build the software to moderate. And these are the sorts of things I think AI will improve. Sorry, yeah, go on. No, you go, Alex.
I have a friend that works in this space, and I was talking to him recently, and he did tell me something similar, that they're getting gradually replaced by by AI tools, essentially, starting from like the bottom rungs of this. So you're trying to get like to go higher up in abstraction, I guess. But then each of the layers of abstraction of content moderation is progressively being like replaced by automation tools, essentially, which sounds scary for that profession, but makes sense in a way as well. I know that a lot of this moderation is very hard on the moderators themselves as well, right? If you have to sort through illegal content and watch videos that contain like, I don't know, violence or things like that, it's probably pretty hard on them. So maybe it's good that it's getting replaced by AI, but at the same time, it feels scary for job security.
Happy for me to crack on with my mad list. I'm glad that my hunch on moderation seems right. And obviously, you know, with that much money going into it as well, it's clearly an area that has a lot of scope for disruption or enhancement, is quite a nice way to put it as well.
Go for it, crack on.
All right. One I actually know quite well is V7 Labs. That's raised 33 million in a Series A, and they do vision AI models. So lots of really interesting use cases, but things like, you know, agricultural uses, identifying the good and the bad produce. But they also have medical applications as well. Lots of awesome vision use cases, and V7 is a really interesting place to look for that. Screen Loop, 7 million in seed funding, aiming to remove unconscious bias in recruitment through AI. I mean, there are so many. There's one even that, you know, if they've raised 7 million, so hopefully they'll have a nice freemium model. Iris Audio will use AI to isolate voices and remove background noise from calls. So whether that's something to be used for enterprise or, you know, enterprise meetings or podcasts, or, you know, journalists out on the street interviewing people, it'll be interesting to see where that crops up.
Can we discuss a bit? Can we discuss a bit Screen Loop and the removal of unconscious bias in recruitment? Because it's fascinating to me how until a few months ago, I guess the narrative was that AI models are dangerous because of the bias that they're encoding. But now we're already trying to use AI models to remove bias in a human process, I guess, which might sound counterintuitive, but at the same time makes sense, right? If it's very hard to remove bias from humans, but maybe it is easier to remove bias from models. Not sure I believe that, but what do the two of you think?
I think it's very easy to fall foul of unconscious bias. And I think a lot of interviewers haven't had any training. It's just what the company needs is to hire somebody, and there's not a process in place to teach someone the correct way to hire. I think in those instances, it's quite hard to be confident that there isn't unconscious bias. So just specifically about Screen Loop, they claim that a bad hire can cost up to $180,000. I mean, that's a very high figure, but a bad hire can obviously cost you whatever you've paid them, plus any time you've spent bringing them up to speed, plus any recruitment fees, perhaps, that you've had to pay out. The platform provides post-interview data analytics and candidate feedback to help companies pinpoint areas of improvement in the hiring process. So it's about sort of the process improvement rather than anything to do with the hiring or choosing of the hire themselves, because that's obviously something that, you know, there's even legislation to say that I believe you can't just be rejected outright by software, or if you are, you have to be able to give the reason. Is there something like that? Does that ring a bell to one of you guys?
not sure.
That's
I
part
haven't
of
heard anything.
GDPR, I think. Maybe I'm wrong, but it does ring a bell.
Is that the case? You can't reject someone by software? That would be interesting. I think that would be difficult to achieve such a law, because you could, a human could program the software with human rules. And then is it a software or a human that's accepting or rejecting a candidate?
Yeah, it's hard to say what would count, but it does seem that GDPR has provisions on automated individual decision making. So making a decision solely by automated means without any human involvement. But you are right that like human written rules could also count as that, right? And then it feels harder to enforce. But yeah, I don't know the technicalities of this, but there is some kind of provision like this in GDPR.
Yeah, I'll plonk a link about this in here. Yeah, I'm remembering this from when I wrote up some GDPR articles. It is to protect individuals specifically from discrimination, but obviously various other reasons as well, from automated decision making that has significant effects on them.
Okay, yeah, I'd love to read about that, because GDPR is about the sharing of personal data. So you must have some link towards that, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it's one of the clauses that you tend to have in sort of terms of use or data privacy policies, where you're saying, as a candidate, I consent for my data to be used for the purposes of things like automated decision making. And if you don't consent to that, then you're not respecting using that person's data in a way that has a significant effect on them. I think that's probably it in a really rough nutshell, but I realize we probably shouldn't make sweeping statements on regulation in a podcast after glancing at a page. So
yeah,
everyone do their own research, and it'll be a good conversation to have. And perhaps Screen Loop will help, and hopefully they'll pay us for this, because before this podcast, I had never heard of them. But I mean, there are loads out there. Absolutely loads. And what I would like to suggest in terms of where we move on to, I think we've spoken about a lot to do with images, video, various means for AI. I feel like that is a fairly known space. There are lots and lots of startups for generating images, generating photos, drawings, video, portrait, design, concepts, whatever. And that gets you from blank page to fun things you can play around with. I think there are heaps, absolutely heaps. If there's any application that involves text or copy or writing, like cold email writing or blog writing or job description writing, which is actually the example that Bard destroyed in its IO demo, those are bread and butter for large language models, as you guys have discussed in previous episodes, right? Sort of generation of language, ingestion of language, and generation of language in a particular direction for a particular purpose. They nail. So I don't really want to talk about images or text generation. One we haven't spoken too much about, other than a bit about voice in the last episode, was analytics, detection, voice, vision, recognition, diagnosis, patterns, prediction, optimization. There are quite a few startups in that space. I guess V7 would be an example of one in that space. And that tends to have quite significant implications: fraud detection, unconscious bias monitoring and improvement, process optimization. I think there's a lot of enterprise stuff. Salesforce will be implementing heaps of things in that sort of area, for example, with their various mini internal AI startups. And personalization, I think, is an interesting one. Character AI, I think that's one of the big ones. 2 former Google employees raised $150 million in a recent round, valuing it at $1 billion. That company specializes in creating AI-driven virtual characters for various applications. And I've already said to Rafie that I think our customers need to be able to customize the look of Genie AI. Like you've got your own little avatar in Reddit. I want to be able to create my own little Genie lawyer. So I think that's an interesting space as well. And then there's industry-specific areas for startups. Any of those piquing your interests?
So I guess that one distinction, like putting character AI aside, though, between the first bunch of things you mentioned, so text generation and image generation, and the second bunch of things, which is more like pattern recognition and stuff like that, is that the second category is not generative AI, which might explain why we've talked about it less and why it's less in the news as well, right? Because over the last few months, there's been a boom in generative AI, I guess, but like there's other fields of AI that are not in the spotlight currently, but have been evolving steadily over the last few years, right? And all of those are included, and maybe they'll get the time in the spotlight as well. But yeah, it does also feel to me like there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in generative AI, which might be a problem because also, as you mentioned, Google releases something and then half of those startups have been replaced, right? So superseded. But there's more, I guess, more value-based problems in non-generative AI that that can provide a lot of value and are being worked on, right? I rambled a bit there. I'm not completely sure that made sense, but it does feel to me like there's a lot of work to be done in non-generative AI as well. And it is being done, right? But it's a bit under the radar at the moment.
There's a couple of Gen AI startups that I've been following that I think are really awesome, which I could share if now's a good time. Yeah. So one is gamma.app. And if you go on their website, at least for me, because I've logged in before, I actually don't see their website, I see their product. And I love products like that. Ours is kind of the same. GitHub, who knows what GitHub's website actually looks like? But that's a bit of a tangent. So what Gamma App do is they create presentations and documents through Gen AI. And they have a bit of a step-by-step workflow, so you can input and personalize what you want to create, be that an investor deck or a client presentation. And through that, they generate the entire presentation. So all the content, all the graphics, all the slides, which is awesome because that's what I want to see. I want to see end-to-end complete workflows done in a click of a button, not asking for much. So yeah, and their UX UI is just really cool, really slick. The way they've designed the AI is quite interesting. We often talk about the UX UI of AI. So they have a button with a kind of avatar, as you were saying, Alex D, just above their toolbar within the document editor. So it's interesting that they're placing the AI as another kind of editing icon with the toolbar. It's just interesting to see how the UX UI becomes normalized in this field over time. So I definitely recommend them, and I can definitely talk more about them if of interest.
Right now, Rafie, that you've been talking about this, I looked through the website and video, and it looks super cool. But at the same time, I wonder what happens when Google just releases this essentially for what's the Google Workspace?
Google Slides.
Slideshow, Google Slides, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it does feel like something that's treading a dangerous space that could overnight be replaced by Google Slides, essentially.
Well, this is really interesting because in Google I/O, they did talk about Google Slides, but all they've got is image generation. They just plugged in image generation, which was really disappointing, because Google Slides has already been replaced by Canva. There's another one before the Gen AI hype. I think it was called something like Presentation AI or something. And they were trying to fit components to the screen in the correct place automatically. But Canva has AI embedded all throughout its app in really useful, specific places, not just randomly plonked there. But the point I wanted to make really is the point that the book, The Innovator's Dilemma, makes, and I've chatted with Alex D about this years ago, which is that big companies like Google tend not to be able to innovate, or companies get to a size where they find it very difficult to innovate. And that's because innovation starts in markets which are typically not very profitable for massive companies that need 10 billion plus market sizes. So when you're tackling a very specific problem or very specific market, only small companies can do that, and then they get to a stage soon enough where their technology is far advanced than what the big company can provide. And so, yeah, just lastly, if you look at Gamma app, like their feature set and the way they've approached presentation creation is just way cooler, way more specific and UX orientated compared to Google Slides. And I don't think they're even competing in a way.
Now you've made me want to try it, Rafie. I think I'll try it out.
Yeah, Rafie has a side hustle as a Gamma salesperson.
Maybe we'll start Gamma up, and they'll have links to Genie AI. Try Genie for your legal needs.
I haven't started on Canva yet, so Alex D is going to rein me back.
I'm just happy for you. The fact that you're talking about something that isn't Canva, I think, is a really good sign. It's important to, find new loves in life.
It's a good sign for my mental health and everyone else's that I talk to.
So going back to a little bit about what Alex Pap was just saying, the Gen AI versus non-Gen AI, Rafie, and the low-hanging fruit, do you tend to agree with the idea that we're seeing a massive influx of Gen AI because it feels a bit like there's low-hanging fruit, but a lot of the hard work and the heavy lifting would be done in non-Gen AI applications? And also, would you guys mind defining generative AI versus non-generative AI? I'd like to pretend I understand, but I'm not sure I do.
I'm not sure this definition will be the best definition, but in general, I guess generative AI is anything that generates stuff. Like we generate images based on text, or we generate text. We ask a language model, please do that, and then it produces a bunch of text, right? So anything that generates things, whereas non-generative AI is, for example, classification. So you look at a medical image, a CT scan, and then try to figure out whether it's whether there's cancer, for example, or not. Or I guess I'm not sure where I want to place speech recognition, because it's again kind of like pattern detection, but it does produce text, I guess. So it's like halfway between generative and non-generative AI. What else would count as non-generative AI?
I think another way to put it, probably Alex P was trying to give a very accessible definition. If I can give an unaccessible one, but might still help the audience, or a mathematical one, is that generative AI is, or generative machine learning is generally creating a probability distribution P, which you can call P, over X and Y, and then using that distribution to make predictions. Whereas discriminative AI, which is the opposite, is probability of X given Y. So in this case, you have a load of apples and pears, and given a new image, is that an apple or pear after training on that previous data set? So in this case, you're classifying whether the new image is an apple or a pear. But if you treated it as a generative problem, you'd have a distribution of apples and pears, and you would try to generate the next image. Where it gets confusing is that people are now using generative AI to solve traditionally discriminative problems, which is why it can be a bit confusing.
Can you think of an example of an application where you've seen a generative approach to what's usually a discriminative problem? I think you've explained that very well. I think both of you have explained that very well. And while Rafie's thinking of an answer to that, perhaps, I'm guessing these chatbot tools, if they're generating a response, then that would be generative. But if you plug something in and you say, give me some analysis of this, there's still an output, right? It's still generating a response. So I think there's also a little bit of a language issue, which I suppose is why the less accessible definition that Rafie's given is helpful, in addition to the simpler one. Also, I couldn't help but think, as soon as, because of all of the problems we've seen with AI tools that are sort of like fun to play with, but actually pretty useless, is the idea that actually, you say, what's the next fruit going to be? And it's just a weird hybrid of an apple and a pear. And it got me wondering whether those actually exist. And now I'm quite hungry.
It does, right? There's those Asian pears that super crunchy and kind of look like apples, and they're delicious. So that would be between an apple and a pear, I guess. You should try it if you haven't already.
I could provide a practical example, which is actually in our own domain. But if we talk specifically about text, let's say you have a chatbot. Now, what's happening when GPT generates text is that it takes the input, let's say the entire sentence, or it could be longer, and it creates a probability distribution across that entire sentence. And using that, it will deduce the next token in the sequence. Depending how the architecture of the model was built, it might generate more than just one next token. But yeah, that's what language modeling is. It's a probability distribution across all tokens or all words in the sentence. Whereas a discriminative approach would say, given the last word or given the last few words, what is the next word? Which I know sounds very similar to what I just said, but you don't have a probability distribution across the entire sentence. You just have, given Y, tell me X. Whereas generative uses Bayes' rule to go from probability of X and Y to probability of Y given X, if that makes any sense. Sorry if I've just confused anyone listening.
I mean, you definitely will have confused some people listening, because you've confused me a little bit. I feel like I understand more, but it's quite a hard thing to describe in about 5 minutes in a way that is going to stick with me for life. So if there's a really good article that describes the difference, it might be something worth popping in the show notes so people can do some further reading on it. What about the sort of low-hanging versus not low-hanging, generative versus non-generative? Did you have a thought on that, Rafie? Because as you say, a lot of people, including ourselves, have looked at what we would have previously thought of as discriminative problems and tried to take a more generative approach to tackling them.
Yeah, it's interesting. My answer might not be one that you'd expect, because I think this is not a technical question, but a product question. Because whether you use generative AI, discriminative AI, symbolic logic, a Turing machine, or whatever it is, to the user using this product, service, or whatever it is, in theory, they shouldn't really care. They just want their job to be done. They just want to get value from their time using this thing. So I think I wouldn't try to classify, is this Gen AI, is this non-Gen AI? I would just try to think about what sort of problem do people want solved? What user experience do they want? And then it's a secondary issue as to which solution one chooses. But it is fascinating, to your point, that now we can use generative AI in many more solution spaces than we could before. And that's both due to the increase in accuracy of the models, but also more so the increase in flexibility of the models, because you can input any sequence of any data and output any sequence of any data.
I like that approach, Rafie, the product-focused approach, especially because, yeah, as well, we've made this point several times by now, but everything is getting muddled between generative and non-generative AI. It's not clear what is what anymore. But yeah, I like the product focus on this instead of like the technology focus.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. And for anyone listening who's thinking, what can I create in this domain, in this new world of AI that is Google proof?
That's a great question.
Yes, I stumped myself with that sentence, I have to admit. I'm not sure there is anything that is truly Google proof, is the gist. But as to Rafie's earlier point about user experience and product, every experience that a user has with your product builds their relationship and their rapport and their trust with your product, and therefore your brand. Google can't replace your brand. So if you create fantastic experiences, as to Rafie's point earlier, preferably end-to-end experiences, because transitions between products can be quite messy. And I think we're probably going into a little bit more of a world of walled gardens and end-to-end solutions because they're more convenient. Although APIs are also absolutely booming. So, I mean, probably both, right? It probably doesn't need to be one or the other there. I would say you're putting yourself in a good place if you can just build a fantastic product that's incredibly helpful. And maybe if it's not one of Google's headline products, you'd be slightly safer. So my best wishes to Gamma, and I hope they make an excellent business out of it. I think they're currently at seed funding stage. I don't think they've gone through Series A yet, have they? But they're California-based. And in all fairness, they're the sort of company that there's a very good chance Google would look at and go, is it more affordable for us to just acquire them than it is to build this into our existing slides infrastructure? Yeah, I mean, Google's got its fingers in every pie. So I don't know where I would suggest if someone came to me asking what's Google proof.
I really don't think it matters personally. I don't think it matters for any startup to even think about Google, because any market that Google is in is a 10 billion plus market, probably 100 billion plus market, meaning that you can create a 1 billion plus startup whilst competing with Google And the classic example is Canva versus Google Slides. You know, Canva's a unicorn, and it's in theory, quote unquote, replacing Google Slides, but it's just not. The market's just massive, and there's space for enough. It's really the small to medium sized companies that you probably need to be thinking about competition with.
And I would say, yeah, no, I think that's bang on. And I think that's quite an inspiring thing to say as well. You don't need to set out to become Google. Google just, I don't think they set out to become the best. They just set out, or the biggest. They just set out to be better than whatever the status quo was at the time. My knowledge of late 90s search engines isn't fantastic, but my guess is going to be Yahoo. Although I do remember things like Alta Vista and various things. Anywho, that's a tangent. The industries that I think we're seeing a lot of AI startups in, disproportionately large. And I should say, this data that I'm using to say where there are large amounts of AI tools. So I mentioned image/video stuff, text/writing and copy, analytics, optimization, prediction as one, personalization as another. Those are things that people are actively typing into Google. I want tools to help me do this, right? So they have a concept that AI tools now exist, and they're actually actively searching for these tools. The industries that have the most people searching for AI tools, based off my data pulled from Google Ads Keyword Planner, March and April, so this is absolutely fresh, is coding, which is unsurprising, HR, which we've already discussed a little bit, marketing, which, to be fair, lots of images, lots of text, so it makes sense, design, likewise, and then robotics. I guess there's various applications of that, and that's probably more of like a classic example of AI, because people just tend to put the both together and you have an iRobot situation. Any particular areas? I don't know if you guys have dabbled much with Copilot recently, or if either of you have used any AI in robotics or design. I guess you've been using Gamma, which is part design, but any of those, and then we'll move on to our crazy things of the week.
I'm not sure it's very interesting, but robotics is well, interesting for anyone else, I guess, but robotics is a fascinating one for me, because AI was, until now, doing a lot of progress in problems that looked hard, like chess, or problems that required a lot of logic, I guess. But we were so behind in fields like robotics and just basic locomotion, right? It seems to be like a problem that infants solve very easily, but then AI just cannot get any progress on. So it's traditionally been one of the like very hard problems of AI, right? But now it seems that we're making progress there as well with large language models. So people have been using large language models as like the planning components of robotics, and combining input and output that you get with robotics, I guess, and being able to interact in the real world with the planning and reasoning that large language models give you. So I'm super excited by the possibilities that are opening up there. Sorry, that I just geeked out there a bit, but yeah, I'm pretty excited by the robotics one.
Geeking out is always welcome with us, Alex P. The other startup I'd mention is a sales startup, and they're very, very early stage, so you probably won't have heard of them, but that's cloudsale.ai, and their website is leaves a lot to be desired. I'm sure they won't mind me saying, and sometimes the best startups are actually like that, because they don't need to have such a great website. But anyway, what they're doing is they're an EF company, which is why I know them, entrepreneur first for people in the audience. And they are essentially automating the entire sales process with GPT. And they have embedded industry knowledge into specific prompts in terms of how to sell to specific industries throughout the sales process. And they start right from automated canvassing in terms of acquiring leads all the way, I don't know how far to the end of the sales process, presumably not taking payments, but further than you would normally. And to the extent where they're actually replying to customers automatically without you doing any input, which is quite exciting from a economic perspective, because you're basically automating a whole role, and you might say scary in other ways.
I would say very cool. Going back to our episode last week, although it sounds like it's doing everything, you're still going to need an expert to handhold, at least for a while. And then that expert who handholds just becomes an expert in handholding these tools. And then they may be able to do so for more clients at a time, right? So they become more productive, or they only need to work 2 days a week to do that. And the other 3 days, they are freed up to do other things. So, don't worry about saying those sorts of things, Rafie. It's an AI podcast after all. But great reference. Okay, yeah. So I there were actually quite a few sales ones. I plonked that into marketing, which many salespeople will absolutely hate me for, and many marketing people will absolutely hate me for. So let's move on to crazy things from the week.
Are you saying, Alex, that you want to own all of sales and marketing for Genie's future?
Well, absolutely. After you just said that we don't need a very good website.
I didn't say that. You need to delete that from the podcast.
Yeah, maybe. All right. I'm keen to go first, if that's all right. So I saw a Guardian article this week that described large language models as the largest heist in human history. And there's been a few articles about the legal implications of the scraping and the collection of knowledge that goes into generating these large language models. But I just hadn't heard it so succinctly put. And I think it's a very interesting counter perspective. The article is actually all about how it's not the models that are hallucinating, but the AI creators. So it's a little bit of a sassy headline, but I just really enjoyed that paragraph. So I'll plonk a link in the show notes to that. And then I have a sort of sub crazy thing that I saw this week. So I watched the Google I/O conference. The thing that got the largest cheer, right? This wasn't the folding Pixel phone, which got way too large a cheer in my head. It wasn't being able to create a table by asking AI to just throw something into Google Sheets. It wasn't the fact that, get this, you can now choose a route in Google Maps and then choose your departure time, and it will show you visually the cars on the road, like little made-up robot cars, and how busy it is and how much traffic there is. And if it's going to rain, it'll rain. So you could see what your route will look like at 9 a.m. versus 2 p.m. And you can also fly that route. That didn't get a cheer. I thought that was epic. That was like navigation becomes a video game. Loved that. No, the thing that got the largest cheer, dark mode for Bard. I don't understand it. Honestly, I've never understood it. I've worked with engineers for years, and I don't understand this cult love for dark modes. Dark mode's cool, fine. It's an AI conference. There were lots of cool announcements. Why does dark mode get the biggest cheer? I'm lost, absolutely lost.
I guess the room was an audience full of engineers, which is a classic problem with Google building for their own engineers rather than the actual customers.
I hope that was it. If it was full of journalists and, ordinary people, not that engineers aren't ordinary people, then I don't know. I still think dark mode would have been up there with the cheers, and I just don't get it. It's a fascination. It's a fetish for dark mode these days. That being said, I'm currently using Zoom in dark mode and it's very nice. All right, who's next for their crazy thing for the week?
I'll go next. I think no comment about the dark mode. It's just you're not an engineer, Alex. It's all right. I think the craziest thing that I saw this week is a Palantir showcase video showing the AIP platform that's using large language models in military operations. I didn't completely get how much of that video is currently true and how much is just like fiction, essentially, but they have AI and language modeling, just like identifying enemies in satellite imagery, and then automatically, well, not automatically, with permission from the human agent, but still suggesting deploying drones, and then suggesting like tactical moves, and the operator picks one of them and it happens, and it's just like so scary to me. The fact that people are trying out using large language models as military tactical commanders, I guess. And I imagine, like, the scariest bit is that I imagine that maybe they're great at it, right? At planning military interventions and helping with tactics.
That is a terrifying thing. I'm really hoping Rafie has something.
You should both
upbeat
watch that video. We can post a link as well, I assume, to the video, but you should both watch it if you haven't.
You're touching on my greatest AI fears ever since the fantastic BBC Sounds podcast series on AI. I think it was a few years ago, and it was a lecture series. One of them was about military applications. And I weed myself a little bit listening to that. A really silly side note, I'm pretty sure the same technology is being used to fly over people's homes in China. So government drones. This isn't, I know this is how it's started sounding already like this is a conspiracy. It's not. I'm reading a book called The New Silk Roads, and it's talking about how China has obviously developed its residential real estate market so fast, and there's a whole middle class that has a lot of money to spend on home improvements, that they're worried about the consistent look of a residential street. So what they're going to do is fly drones over and basically identify the houses that have things like chimney pots that aren't in line with regulations and stuff. What's ridiculous is that it's kind of similar technology, right? Like the computer vision, the drones, it's just one ends up with a stern government letter and the other one, more painful outcomes.
I've read that book as well, Alex, and I found it a bit dry and long, but at the same time fascinating, and giving like a version of history that we, I guess, a Eurocentric view do not usually get. So I'd recommend it as well. I like that book.
If we're on the fear-mongering trope, which I think Alex has banned me from.
That's fine. Let's end with fear.
Well, I've got a positive note after the fear-mongering.
Good. As long as you promise you've got a positive note.
Well, that might not be positive, but it's not fear. So I'll start with the fear-mongering. But I just thought it's interesting. I don't know if people saw the news that Iran's top nuclear scientist was assassinated about a year or two ago. This article I'm reading from the New York Times, published September 2021. And essentially, it was quite a difficult assassination to accomplish. And it was done by a remote-controlled car with an AI machine gun.
What does an AI machine gun entail, Rafie?
Yeah, from what I read, and I'm no expert on the matter, it's a 7.62 millimeter sniper machine gun, according to the New York Times. And yeah, there's no person operating this gone as far as I can tell, but it had a target and did its thing, really.
It's like image recognition, recognize the target's face specifically and automatically fire or something like that. Terrifying if it is, which probably it is, right? Alex Denne is saying no.
This is the opposite of what Alex Denne wanted.
Rafie, what's the positive note to end on?
Okay, change topic. So the next note is well, I'm just going to talk about an article from The Guardian this week on Meta. Just find it quite funny that their massive bet on the metaverse is completely failing. And a quote from Zuckerberg is, "A narrative has developed that we're somehow moving away from focusing on the metaverse vision." So I just want to say up front that that's not accurate. We've been focusing on both AI and the metaverse for years now, and we'll continue to focus on both. But yeah, it talks about just various small AI initiatives that Facebook has introduced, but nothing that exciting, if I'm totally honest.
I remember seeing, like, maybe a few weeks ago, automatically generated pictures of Mark Zuckerberg in, I don't remember what context, but then everyone was commenting, and actually it was true that it looks more human than the real pictures of Zuckerberg. So I don't know how he managed to do that, but he looks so non-human.
He's not a human, I'm pretty sure.
All right, here come the
He's
conspiracy
like the
theories.
OG generative AI agent.
So I think what Rafie, you said, it starts off, if you're a Facebook investor and you've had a very, very bad few years, as this AI bet has, as the Meta bet has spent a lot of Facebook's cash, you're glad to hear that actually there's a big AI investment. You're slightly less glad to hear that really it's just Zuckerberg reframing a lot of his spend, because there's a big belief, and perhaps we could do a discussion on this for a future episode, is AI and the metaverse / video gaming, because there's a lot of use of AI in creating things like non-player controlled characters, and you can imagine generation of entire unique worlds, unique to the player. I think there are lots of interesting parallels with games and the metaverse. Obviously, there's enterprise applications that Zuckerberg is desperate to get a monopoly on. But he's putting some money in some sensible places. It's not all on his big metaverse bet, right? Surely there was some concession in that article, Rafie. Or was he really like, no, those were all rumors. I'm still all in on the metaverse.
So they are working on large language models, and in fact, our previous machine learning engineer is now at Meta AI doing exactly that. But no, I mean, to be honest, it just goes on. It just goes on to say things like, Meta's flagship virtual platform, Horizon Worlds, reportedly has fewer than 200,000 active users. And Reality Labs, which is a unit of Meta, reported a 4 billion operating loss in the first quarter of this month, losing 13.72 billion last calendar year. I
must say, I really don't like those articles phrasing of losing, right? Because a lot of it was like went into research. I don't want to say that that's lost money, right? So maybe it's research in the wrong direction. I don't know. I'm not sure how to judge that, but it still went into research, right? It's not money that was necessarily lost, even if that research is not necessarily useful for Meta. And even if Meta fails, then it's still research that was produced that hopefully at some point will benefit someone else, right? So also, one thing to say about Meta, I guess, and the language models. Last week, we discussed the Google Engineer article about how open source large language models are going to take over, and that closed language models like Google's or OpenAI's have no advantage. And it's interesting to say that all of those open source, smaller large language models are now currently based on Meta's foundation language model, Llama, right? So Meta is not out of the race there. And if someone were to bet on like open source language models, then what Meta is currently doing is the right thing, I guess.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah, pretty much all small language models are based on like Llama.
Are those from the leaked weights of Llama?
I think so, yeah. I mean, not all of them are leaked, right? Because unless I'm mistaken, Meta was providing access to Llama, just like for specific, you had to go through an approval process first. But the weights were leaked, and then anyone can download them online and play with them. But you could still get them like in a legit way, I guess.
Got it. And yeah, just really good point briefly, Alex P, on the losses, because most tech companies show a loss. So you can frame it in any way, really. It is a Guardian article after all. Not that I dislike the Guardian. I meant to say it is a mainstream media article after all.
Excellent work. You saved yourself there. Excellent. Well, let's wrap it up there for a discussion on AI startups. We'll put a link to a bunch of the startups, especially the ones that we've lovingly mentioned. If not, I would suggest that you search things like the top 25 AI startups in the UK, because then you'll see a blog that we happened to appear in this week, which was very nice. Thank you, startups.com. Next week, I believe we'll be talking about prompt hacking and democratization. There may be a little element on that to do with no-code and low-code AI tools, which I personally find very useful. And a lot of people think is going to be the way in which AI really gets integrated into the workplace. Individuals, bringing them in as users, even if they're not the sort of mainstream department level buyer, just people trying to be more productive, doing their end-to-end jobs to be done, as Rafie alluded to earlier, which was a great framework, by the way, job to be done. So I would definitely take a look at that as well. So thank you, Alex, and thank you, Rafie, and we'll see you guys next week for prompt hacking and democratization, and then we'll be talking about AI companions the week after and AI and coding after that. So yeah, please tell people about the podcast, and we will speak to you soon.